Are you into heavy Euro board games? If you are, please let me know down in the comments which heavy board games you like. If you do like heavy Euro board games, you might just like what I am going to show you today, because I am going to show you Scharz. This is a game where you try to take over land during medieval Europe. You do this by sending out your units, building cities, building ports, using your ships to do fishing. You can sow grain, you can have the herds, you can do a bunch of things in this game. In this game, you have 4 different modes. The one I'm going to show you today is just the basic mode, just for you to get an understanding what this game is about. But there is so much more in this game that I'm going to show you today. This is a 2 to 12 player game, meaning that you can be a lot of people playing for hours and hours. And in this game, there is so much things going on the battlefield that you have to be really highly strategic to figure out where you want to go next and which plan you want to stick with to the end. This game will be out in a new edition in September this year, but you can already buy the game now on their webpage. You can find the links down in the description for all you need to do to order your copy today. In there you will also find the full rules and go through everything you need to know to be able to get this up on the table. Today I'm going to show you the setup of the game. I'm going to give you an overview of how the gameplay actually works and go through some of the rules so you will be a step on the way to start playing your game. So let's just take a look at it. This is the setup of the game if you are playing basic mode. There is a more advanced mode as well, but in this video I will show you the basic model. Players start to rule a d6 to determine who will be the starting player. Once we know who the starting player is, we need to give out all the starting components to the different players. And of course, each player should pick their player color. Each player receives 3 villages, these are the blank ones, and on the other side you have the docks. So each player should have 3 blank ones and 1 dock. Each player should also receive 2 sheep and 1 pig. Last thing players get are 10 grains, 5 cohorts of light infantry, and 1 cohort for ship transports. Then each player takes a grain token and places it on number 5 on their player board, symbolizing that they now have 5 money. Then everyone takes their ship token of their player color and places it on 0 on the victory point track. Now we go clockwise around the table, starting with the first player, placing out villages on the board. Each player plays out 1 village within the territory area on the map. Once we have gone 1 round around, we then go counterclockwise, again placing out another village on the map. We go around the table like this until all 3 villages are placed out. Then we go 1 last round, and now we get a chance to relocate any villages. Once all players have placed out their villages on a land field being a field within the red line, we start to place out the rest of the components. But there are some rules. You can have a maximum of 2 herds per land field. You can have a maximum of 5 grains per village. The docks must of course be placed by the water with the transport ship on them. And now we take the rest of the components and put them next to the tables for the players to easy reach, along with the dice we later will use in combat. Next to the board we also have this tile showing us the different phases of the different seasons. So this was the setup of the base game. Not that hard, right? But like I told you, this is the base game, so once you advance a little bit, more things will come out on the board. And it is strongly recommended for you to start with the base game, play a few rounds and get the hang of it. Once you've done that, you can move on to the more advanced game. This game is about you conquering land. taking over territory, and forcing the other people away from the land that you want to conquer. You can do this by using the military strength, but you can also win the game if you have the most land tiles, or if you're the richest person, or if you reach number 10 on the victory track first of all. This is usually done by actually conquering land and doing battle. So you can win this game in a few different ways. And like I told you, it is played out during a series of rounds where we go through the different seasons of the year, starting with spring, going all the way through winter. And during these different seasons, you can choose to do different things. But before we look at the gameplay, we should start to look by the different cohorts, settlements, grains, and whatever, so we know what it actually means. Here we have the different type of buildings. We have a village over here, putting two together and we have a city. Here we have a dock. Over here we have a port. And here we have 4 of the blank tiles, giving us a fortification. But this is only in the more advanced games. And here we have the different types of resources. We have grain, fishes, herd of sheep, herd of pigs, herd of cattle, and herd of horses. Again, the cattle and horses are used in the more advanced games. Here we have the different cohorts, meaning our army units. Over here we have light infantry, heavy infantry, siege machines, cavalry, transport ship, warships, mercenaries, corsairs, and war elephants. Now that we know the different components of the game, it's time for us to take a look at the map itself. It looks like a lot, but it's really not that difficult to understand which pieces are which. If we look at the map, we can see that there are a bunch of different lines out on the map. The red ones indicate a valid border, meaning that this is a border, and in here you have this game map's zone. And the red borders you can cross. The black ones, on the other hand, are impenetrable borders, meaning that here you cannot pass. Out in the sea, we also have borders dividing the sea into different zones. The different type of borders indicate if this is a calm sea or if it is a stormy sea. Stormy sea and calm seas are only used in the more advanced games. And then we have the different type of colors on the game fields as well. The yellow ones, for example, are very profitable for grain, but they're weak for defense and herd possibilities. But the green ones are average for grain and they're poor for defense, but you can have herds here. The brown fields here are not that good for grain, but they're good for defense, and you can have herds here. In the more advanced games, these also stop movements, they slow retreat, and they wear and tear on the cavalries. The turquoise ones here are not that good for grain, but they're good for defense, and you can have herds here. Again, in more advanced games, they stop movement, slow retreat, and you do not need to land ship movements. The light blue ones here means that there are no storm, but the fishing is not that certain. The deep blue ones here means that there will be storm and you will be guaranteed to get fish. But as again, these are only used in the more advanced games. So this game is played out during a series of rounds, all taking place in different seasons. Again, this is the basic ones here, but you also have the more advanced. Here you will have more sub-phases and even more things going on during the year, and you will also have a longer season. But let's focus on the basic games. So we start in spring. If we look at our little round overview here, we can see that we have spring over here, and we start with a special phase, named cubs. For every 2 identical herds that you have, you gain 1 more. And it kind of makes sense, right? You have 2 sheep, they fell in love, and they got a baby. So the herds have mated and hopefully got some healthy babies. Now we move into the next sub-phase, which is move. And we go from left to right on these sub-phases. So we start with move cohorts. Before we start to move, we need to make sure that each of our cohorts are pointing north. Meaning this black line here should be pointing north. This indicates that they have not moved yet. Each of these cohorts can move one step. But remember that we cannot pass through the black lines. Once you have finished the movement, you simply turn your cohort facing south. So you can take your cohort and move one step. But if you use a transport ship, you can actually move 2 fields. Meaning that you take your cohort, you take the ship, and you use the ship to cross the sea. Once we have moved our cohorts, we move into special move. In this phase, we get to relocate herds. One step. But we can only relocate herds if your land field is not locked. A locked land field means that you have an enemy on your field. So if this blue player would like to move their sheep herds, they can't because they have an enemy on their land field. The next sub-phase here is retreat. And this is where we have a possibility to retreat any cohorts that we feel like does not have the right placement. But you cannot retreat from a locked land field, meaning a field with an enemy, remember? But here, for example, I could choose to take this cohort here and move it over here. But I need to have a settlement that is completed. Otherwise, you cannot retreat. When we're done with the move subphase, we move down one step to the combat subphase. And again, we start from the left, going right, starting with withdraw. So that was the move actions. We have moved our cohorts around, maybe we have taken the ship to another coast, and maybe we have moved our herds around as well. And now we move into the combat phase. And this is where we are going to do some combat, as you might expect. So now we need to look at the fields to see where we have confrontation, meaning 2 of the different players on the same game field. But before we start to actually battle, we have a chance to withdraw. So what does withdraw mean? Well, that means that here, for example, the black player has the possibility to withdraw into their settlement. And they can actually choose to bring a herd. Just remember that a village can only have 5 cohorts, but a bigger city can have 10. But if you have withdrawn to a settlement and you have no defenders out on the game field, well, you might end up in encirclement. But what is encirclement? Well, encirclement is basically the enemies being on your land field, but you are in your settlement. And now the enemies are out on your fields, so they actually control it. And you are encircled in your settlement and really can't do anything. The grains and herds that are out on the field can be taken by the enemies, and they can choose to either burn the grain or wait for the harvest to harvest them. And then they can sell your herds, or they can choose to cull them instead. And you can't really do anything there on this land field anymore. You can't sell, you can't trade, you can't do anything, you can't upgrade or buy. You are simply stuck in this position. The withdrawals are taken care of, and we move one step to the right here to the actual battle. And here we need to look out on the game field to see where the battles will actually take place. And as you might expect, these are the land game fields where you have 2 different players standing and just looking at each other. So here we have a battle. We have 2 blue cohorts, 1 white cohort, and the white settlement. The cohorts here all have 1 life and get to roll 1 white D1 each. Meaning that the white player gets to roll 1 die, but the blue player gets to roll 2. 1 for each cohort. Besides the cohorts, we also need to do this if we have any naval battles. Depending on what you roll, you will of course get different results. If you get a sword, it is a hit and you remove a life from the opponent, if they do not have shields. And if you roll a blank, well, you simply just swung your sword right out in the air and you hit nothing at all. And it also depends on which kind of units you have, because they all have different lives, They all have different dice rolls and they all have different shields and attacks, so you need to keep a track on that. In this pamphlet that you get with the game, you can see the different abilities for each unit. If you have done your first battle and there's still units out on the land game field, you get a chance to retreat or escape rather. And if you do not do that, well, the battle continues until one side is left standing. When all the battles between the different cohorts out on the land fields are taken care of, we move into the siege step of combat. And this is where we need to look at all of the land games fields where we have an encirclement. Remember, this was a settlement where your opponents are basically hiding in, and you are standing outside looking at the walls, determining now if you want to try to break in or if you just want to keep the encirclement. If you choose to break through the thick walls of this settlement, you first need to break 5 shields per settlement, plus the opponent get to roll a d2. Meaning that if this blue player wants to take over this village, they first need to break the shields, meaning that they need to throw 5 swords to break the shields. It's only when the shields are broken that you can start to attack the units inside. But they also need to survive the cohort's attack, because they are attacking you from inside the village. The cohort throwing a white die and the city is throwing a blue die. If the attacker managed to break all the shields and get into the fortifications, 2 things can happen. The fortification is now destroyed and the building is looted on money, and if it would have been a city, it could have been undergraded down to a village. Supplies are also gained by the attacker but must be stored immediately, otherwise they will be lost. If the siege fails, well, the fortification is restored. So that's how you do the combat subphase and do some battle. Hopefully you have managed to take over some new land, and if you have not, well, better luck next time. Now we move into the rear subphase. Again, starting from the left, going to right. Now we start with the construction. And this is where we get to actually upgrade the structures that we have started to upgrade in the previous round. Because in the trade subphase, this is where we get to take our cohorts, the light infantries, and put them on the structures out on the map that we would like to upgrade in the upcoming round. I'm going to show you this in a bit. But let's pretend that we have already done this, meaning that we, in the last round, put 2 light infantries on our dock, trying to upgrade it to a port. And you will build this 25% per unit you have on this structure. Meaning that I have 2 light infantries here, letting me upgrade this dock 50%. So in the next construction phase, I will have a fully upgraded port. But now let's go into the trade phase and show you how we actually put these on here. So now we move from the construction phase into the trade phase. And this is where you would put your units on the structures you would like to upgrade. And you could also choose to put another unit on a structure that you have already started to upgrade, to get it done even faster in the next round during the construction phase, just as I just showed you. In the trade phase, you can also trade with the ones that are neighboring into your areas. But to be able to trade, you would need to have a settlement next to a neighbor with a settlement to actually be able to trade. So it's not just one unit next to another unit, that would not count. It needs to be settlements. And if you are surrounded, like this poor fellow right here, well, you can't trade because you are in a lockdown. You can also trade overseas, but you need to have an unblocked dock. And you can choose to put out new structures on a land game field where you have units. And it also needs to be linked to your headquarters. If you have all these conditions, well, then you can put out some new structures. But you will, of course, also need to pay the amount stated for building that structure. And of course, you can get some new units during the trade phase as well. placing them out on a land game field where you have a completed settlement. So you can't just place them anywhere, you need to place them somewhere where you actually have a finished settlement. And there cannot be any enemies on that field. That was the trade phase, now we move into the fishing. For each sea game field that you control, you can get some fish. If you are in the calm waters, you would need to roll a d4, meaning this one here. Now if you roll a 1, 2, 4, you get some fish. But if you roll 5 or 6, well, you did not get fish. But if you're out on the stormy waters here, you will definitely get fish, and you do not need to roll any die. The fishes that you get are stored at your interconnected docks. A dock can store 2 fishes, but a port can store 4. With the rear subphase done, we now move down to the last phase of our first round. This is the sowing and yields. To put out some sowing out on our maps, we need to have land game fields under our control, and they need to be connected to a city or a village that has grain. And you get to take one of these stored grains and put them out on the land game fields that you control, if there's no herds in them. And this is the way you sow and eventually get more grain, because after you have sowed, we can yield. To know how much grain we will get from the grain that we sowed during the last round, we need to look at the color of the game fields. If it's a yellow field, we will get 3 grain. If it's a green field, we will get 2. And if it's a brown or turquoise color, we will get 1. That was all of the phases during spring. And when we come to summer, autumn and winter, all of the move, combat and rear subphases works just the same as I have just shown you. But at the bottom here, we have some special phases, also at the start of the winter phase. So let me show you what those mean. It's usually said that there's nothing certain in life except death and taxes. And this game is no different, because the second special phase in round number 2 is taxes. And this is where we need to see what kind of cities, ports, docks and so on we have out on the map to know how much money we will get. You get 1 coin for every village, 2 coins for every port, and 3 coins for each city. You also get half a coin for each land game field you control. Once you know how much coins you have received, you simply move this up on your player board, indicating your amount of money. So you have this special phase taxes during summer, but when you come into round number 3 in autumn, we have harvest. If you have sowed any grain during the last phases, during the special phase, the harvest phase that we are in now, this is where we get to store our grain. But you need to control the land game field, and you need to have a connected, finished settlement. And remember that the small villages here, they can only store 5 grain. But the bigger cities over here, they can store 10. We now move into the last phase, and we start with recruitment. And this is where we can recruit some light infantry to a cost of 1 instead of 2. But we of course still need to control the land game area where we like to put them out. But we also need to have a finished settlement where we want to place them, or in an adjacent land game field. So now we are in the last phase and the last sub-phase. This is the special phase that is called feeding. We need to feed all our animals out on the map. We could also kill them to get some meat. And you can take that meat and sell it later if you want to. But we also need to feed the settlements and all of our units. And we can only feed our units and animals that are interconnected with the food itself. And we can feed them with grain or with fishes. If you do not manage to feed anyone out on the board, any units, you will end up losing those units to the enemies. So that was all of the 4 rounds. Now, if no one has still won the game, we simply start over at spring again, and then we go through all of these phases again, until one of these conditions are met. One player gaining dominance, meaning that they get 10 victory points. If one player forces all of the other players to surrender, well, that player is the winner. Or if one player has two of these conditions, either if they control 14 land game fields, have 7 completed settlements, 35 points of agriculture, or have built 2 cities, or have 70 prestige points. If one player has 2 of these conditions, well, then they are the winner. If none of these conditions are met, the winner with the most money at the end scoring is the winner of the game. And that's how you play the game. But like I told you, this is only the basic mode. There's 3 other modes for you to take on. But it's highly recommended that you start with the basic mode to really get a hang of how the fighting goes, all of the different units, the buildings and so on. And once you got a grip on that and you feel a bit cocky, you can try to start with the complex mode. On this one, there's even more special phases, there's even more rounds, there's more units out on the board, and it just gets a lot harder for you to control. It's really complex and it gets really heavy. So like I told you, start with the basic ones and then simply move up in this game. It's also a really good idea for you to sit down and really learn the different units before you start playing the game. What does the different units do? How much life do they have? And so on, because this will make you break into this game a lot easier. The game rules in this game is also quite complex to learn. There's a lot of different phrases, there's a lot of text in this one. There's not that much images for you to understand what actually goes on. So before you start to read the game rules, you should actually start by just reading this little note here. This is for the basic games and will take you step by step through the different phases and the different things that happen. It's also good to have this little folder here next to you, because this is also you going through 4 rounds with your friends, so all of you can learn the game together. Once you have gone through this, you are ready to start playing an actual round and an actual phase. In these rules, you also have the different colors in the rulebook itself. You have white for the basic, yellow for the advanced, and pink for the really complex ones. So they have done everything they can to split the rules up as easy as they can to possibly make you learn this game. The game also comes with 4 of these folders, where you can get an overview of everything that happens in the different phases, what all the different tokens, sub-phases, and so on means, but also where you can get an overview of the different units, the construction itself, the trading phases, and everything you need to know. Each player get one of these for themselves so they can have next to them and take a look at and follow along. The artwork in this game is quite simple and makes me think of the old school heavy Euro games that really started all of this. This brings me back to the time in the 80s where we had these motherboards that started all of this gaming for us. You have the simple colors, the simple scheme, the simple tokens, and if you're into classic cool games with a lot of strategy, well, you're probably gonna like this one. The little tokens of this game has a quite nice feel to them. They're wooden tokens, and again they have this basic artwork, but they bring back the classic memories. You have the little vehicles here, the units that are really just a cube with different little patterns on them. So it's quite simple made, but when you play the game, you realize that this is quite complex, and it's quite complex for you to remember which unit did what, where they went, so you need to use your brain a lot in this game. Also, with the different phases where you can move your units back and forward, makes this game quite hard to master. Like I told you, it's not that hard to learn, really. I mean, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of units, and there's a lot of phases, but this game becomes complex in the gameplay itself. And the different phases here, you'd make the move phase simultaneously, meaning that we all move out at the same time. So there's really no room for you to look what the other players are doing and then rethink, because you need to do the move now. But then you come into the phase where you can withdraw your units, making one move almost feel like you have fooled the enemy into your territory, and now you move back and you might come back with even more forces in the next round. So this game is highly strategic, it's quite heavy as I told you, And if you're into strategy word game with a lot of economy in them, well, this game is for you. There you have it, my friends. That was Scharz for you, a heavy euro coming out on Kickstarter later this year. This is a lot of strategy. You need to know what is going on the board, trying to understand what your opponents want to do and where they want to go, where you should move your units, where you should move your units back, which units do you need more of, which buildings do you want to expand, but also there's a lot of ways of you winning this game. So you need to have like a strategy on what you want to do from the start of this game. Because if you start to spread out in different directions, well, you will probably fail. But if you stick to one strategy, you have a good chance. This game is highly recommended if you like heavy games, if you like a lot of strategy. If you do not like that, well, this game is not for you. If you want to know more about the game, check out the links down in the description. It will be on Kickstarter later this year, so check it out if you want to. Are you into heavy euros? Please tell me about it down in the comments. I would love to know if you're into this kind of games. I quite enjoyed this. I mean, my brain was boiling after a few hours, but it was a lot of fun. So if you want to check it out, do that down in the links. Until next week, people, please take care of each other. Please keep on spreading that board gaming love I know you all have. Peace.